Hi, my name is Tiwa, as I'm sure many of you know by now, and my project is on authenticity and taste. How do they correlate? So we chose three different food environments. El Modelo, which is supposed to be authentic Mexican cuisine. We chose El Patio de Albuquerque, which was a sit-down restaurant very close to campus. And then we finally chose El Super, a grocery store, fast and easy service. And we're going to see how foodscapes shape soundscapes and how that affects taste. I'm drawing on Stephen Fell's acoustemology and a way of knowing a space, and Enrico Lamadrid's concept of a quinceañera, the strong attachment to a place. I wanted to see how the soundscapes of all the different food environments shape their authenticity. So, this is kind of how we rated it. We rated it based on four different categories: soundscape, authenticity, ambiance, and finally, taste and texture. These were a couple big ones. We started off with the one closest to campus, El Patio del Albuquerque, and that was quite the experience. So, El Patio Albuquerque was a sit-down restaurant pretty close to campus. I'd say if you guys walk, it's right past Los Victors, and the service is great. The coloring was great. Walking in, as you guys can see, like the housing and everything, a lot of colors are really nice. The server was really sweet. But what stood out to me and my friend immediately was the music. The music was very Western. There was like a 1965 copy-off of like what would have been, I think I remember they were playing, yeah. So one of the first songs that welcomed us when we went in was Here It Comes Again by some random group from 1965. I think it was the Good Fortunes. But anyway, very old-timey kind of music, nothing like Mexican or Spanish. So that kind of definitely took away from our authenticity score. So adding up all of our scores, me and my friend gave authenticity for El Patio de Albuquerque a 4. The soundscape was a 6. We kind of liked 60s music. It was pretty fun to listen to. And then ambiance an 8. As you can see, the setting was really nice. The scenery was really nice. And I'll play a couple clips of like the sound as we were trying out the room. It had a very different texture. It was kind of hard, very small, very cut up, and yeah, that was really it about that place. The second one we went to was El Modelo. Now this was a step up compared to the last one. In El Modelo, we heard the sizzling of the meat. We heard the camaraderie between the chefs and cooks. We didn't hear any music walking in, but we didn't need to. The place was packed to the brim compared to the last place that wasn't packed at all. We heard both Spanish and English, and maybe a little bit of regional music playing, but the majority of the time, all we heard was the large kitchen in the back with at least 40 people cooking. I'd say the rhythm of the place was definitely busy and alive compared to the other one near campus that seemed more conservative. Not as many people. Definitely, I didn't hear any Spanish speakers. So yeah, that kind of shows a different audience for the different kinds of music, which created a different kind of soundscape comparing the two. But it was almost like El Modelo didn't need a playlist. It almost seemed like the chicharron itself kind of had a sound of its own. The sound is part of the flavor. Through Feld's like ideas of acoustemology, I'm not just tasting the chicharron, I'm acknowledging and knowing its sound. The clatter of the pans, the camaraderie, especially since chicharron back in the day was a group activity, a familial activity, was the beat of music. And this tells me that this is Mexican food made in a Mexican space. Finally, me and my friend did our rating, and we summed them up together. We gave authenticity an 8, soundscape an 8, and ambiance a 5. Chicharron, again, is historically a group dynamic, so we weren't able to get any clips because we weren't allowed to record in there for food safety reasons. I really wanted to record the kitchen, but again, it was very packed, and we respected the manager's wishes. Finally, we went to El Super. And El Super is a grocery store. Really nice. Love the colors. Very nice staff. Awesome cooks. Fast service. The very first restaurant we went to, El Patio de Albuquerque, it took 20 minutes for our appetizer menu. El Modelo, it took 15, though it was very busy compared to the El Patio. And El Super, instant service with the most amount of meat, most amount of bang for buck. The soundscape was dominated not just by the Mexican regional music, but also by the beeping of the buzzer, the overhead announcements, the beeping scanners, the cart rolling, and whatever music was played by the store speakers, as I mentioned before. It doesn't tell you, it doesn't give you like a place to linger. The sound tells you to move, shop, and go, kind of which matches the quick pace of the restaurant. When I tasted the chicharron here, I expected El Super to actually be the worst. I expected the taste to be disconnected due to the fast-paced nature of what a grocery store would be like, but it turned out to not be. It was, in my opinion, the second best compared to El Modelo, and it wasn't even by a very big margin. By far, El Patio was the worst place I had tried chicharron at. And I think, in terms of Querencia, I don't feel much attachment to the space, like he mentions in his writing. I feel like I'm just passing through, but with Stephen Field's ideas, I get that listening through this soundscape, I believe that the space is about efficiency and routine, not really like the heavy, colorful vibe that the first one tries to possess. So therefore, we gave a rating for El Super. El Super, authenticity a 9. I mean, it was the best cut of meat, complete Mexican staff, very nice. The soundscape was a 10. We kind of like busy areas, so we didn't really appreciate El Patio that much. There was only like 3 or 4 customers compared to the other 2 restaurants, and the ambiance was an 8. Okay, so in conclusion, I'd say that there are 3 different key things of all the different restaurants. First, there was El Patio. The relaxed conversational ambiance and sit-down made the chicharron feel like a New Mexican home. But it wasn't the best. It was in fact the worst. And I think what really set us up for disappointment was the kind of colorful menu, the major place on aesthetics, and the music. The Western music and the New Mexican style made it very clearly a New Mexican restaurant set out for students. I wouldn't call it the best chicharron ever. At El Modelo, we kind of saw a more rich Spanish environment, where a community was definitely more desired, and less emphasis on the sound of the music versus the sizzling of the grill, the sound of the Spanish and English, and just the busy bustle of all the different people that were walking in and out. Very popular place in New Mexico. And the soundscape kind of reinforced the idea, at least for me and my friend, of what authentic Mexican food would taste and sound like. At El Super, the soundscape was more dominated by the idea of efficiency. We heard the grocery carts moving, we heard the speakers going on, and we heard some regional music as well. And I definitely say that I expected to be disappointed by the grocery store, but it was in fact better than the aesthetic Western El Patio. This reinforces Feld's concept of acoustemiology. I found that learning about these places, not just through taste, but what I heard, helped me really decipher what it means to be authentic and know what chicharron is supposed to taste like. And with Madrid's Querencias, I noticed that places where I felt like attachment and comfort weren't just about food quality, they were about how sound made me feel welcome. or like I belong to that particular version of authentic New Mexican or Mexican identity. In other words, taste isn't just about the tongue, it's about the music, the voice, and the kitchen noises, the entire soundscape of where we eat. Thank you for listening and for eating chicharron with me.
Okay, here again, I just wanted to give some of my final thoughts and maybe some editing I did for my final, I guess, slide. So the total scores add up. As you guys can see, El Modelo and El Super won. This is a little bit different from my initial ratings for each of the places. And initially, I was pretty disappointed that they were the same, that it ended up in a tie. But I actually decided that that kind of shows a different way. Authenticity has like different registers, so it kind of shows something else. So like El Super and El Modelo are authentic in different ways. For example, El Super is like everyday lived authenticity. So it's super authentic in the sense that people grab each their own. There's bilingual announcements. There's family. There's workers. There's beeping. The soundscape was beeping carts, Spanish and English, generic music. It felt like a real, everyday New Mexican slash Mexican life, not like a staged experience. The creencia in that is like routine and familiarity. This is where we actually shop. Versus in El Modelo, it was more of like a heritage and traditional authenticity. It was authentic because it performs Mexican culinary traditions. Traditions like long history of specialized menus, the kitchen noise, the Spanish, and not really relying on music, but just the sounds of the kitchen. The soundscape was the sizzling meat, the orders, the shouting orders between the cooks, the crowded line. Everything felt kind of like a more traditional Mexican space. And the creencia here is that people's long-term emotional attachments to their place are for tamales, burritos, and chicharron. So, in conclusion, I guess El Super and El Modelo tie in total score, but they sound authentic in different ways. El Super feels authentic as part of everyday routine life, while El Modelo sounds authentic as a traditional Mexican food space with a long culinary history. And I think that's all the comments I have to say about this project. So, yeah, thank you.